Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar series today. And as you know, every week we cover e-learning trends. We share iSpring tips and tricks and clients' cases. And my name is Paulina. I'm the community manager. I will be your moderator today. And today's topic is quite interesting because we are going to talk about the 7 deadly myths of microlearning. And to cover this great subject, I have invited a true expert in microlearning, owner of Learning Rebels, and the author of the book Disruptive Learning, who was recently called, I have to read it, the top 100 e-learning movers and shakers by e-learning industry. Everybody please meet Shannon Tipton. Hi Shannon, thanks for tuning in. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you. It's a lovely day here in Chicago. The sun is shining and it's not cold, so that's always a bonus out here, considering we only get a few months of warm weather, and this is just a glorious day. So thank you for having me. Today, as Paulina stated, we are talking about the 7 myths around microlearning, the things that always seem to hold us up. Now, she so kindly put into the chat area a link for a survey, and I'm really interested in understanding more about what myths are you most interested in? What's the one myth that it's always sitting in the back of your head that you keep hearing and you would like to have a more fuller, more robust discussion about? So take a moment, click on that link. We already have some people coming in and I'm seeing the votes coming in, which is great. I love to see this sort of interaction because what I want to do is I want to try to prioritize this presentation in accordance to what you want to hear. I could go through the whole thing, the whole rigmarole, but I really do want to focus on the items that are most important to you first. So take a moment, click on that link, and let me know which one is most important to you. Okay, so let's see here. What have we got? I see the votes coming in, and we've got a hot and heavy race here between. Oh no, it just jumped. Everybody's really curious about how much time microlearning needs to be. How long should microlearning take? And then, oh, good. The one that is always hot on my radar is microlearning is just chunking. And I see that that has one of the lower ones. So that's great. So everybody is really on board with the fact that microlearning is not just chunking and we understand that concept. That's awesome. So that tells me I don't have to spend a whole lot of time talking about that. But everybody is really interested in the duration and whether or not it's video or whether or not we need some high tech tools or high programming skills in order to make microlearning happen. Let's start then talking about myths and microlearning, separating fact from fiction. As Paulina introduced me, as she did a really nice job of that. Thank you so much. I do own a company called Learning Rebels, and our mantra, as it will, is that it's time to think differently about training. And it's time to think differently about workplace learning. And microlearning is one of those areas which should be in everyone's toolbox. And I've been working in the microlearning space. My company has been working in the microlearning space for many years now. Before it became, the thing to do. And I was super excited to see the popularity increase, especially now when you think about all of the virtual learning that is happening and all of the virtual training that is going on. The natural link to all of your virtual training activities are microlearning elements. What are you doing to connect the learning to your virtual classes? And microlearning can certainly help you do that. Now, there's all my information. So my website information, my Twitter information. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me anywhere to go ahead and ask me additional questions. Now, Many times what happens when I start talking about microlearning, this is the face I get. They're like, I don't know. I have no idea. It's just another thing that's out there. It's just another fad that's out there. I don't understand it. I don't know what's happening around it. Well, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and clear some of that up for you today. But first, before we start, uh, I want to right size, or rather level set, our definition of microlearning. The definition in my world, and like I said, I've been working in this space for quite a long time, microlearning is short bursts of right-sized content to help people achieve a specific outcome. Microlearning is very, very targeted information, targeted towards a specific topic, towards a very specific audience. So one of those myths that was on the list was the one size fits all thing. And so microlearning really does, in order for it to be at its most effective, is super targeted about topic and about audience. And so I wanted to level set our definition before we officially start. And it's important to really identify that microlearning is a way of learning. It's not learning done to you. It's a methodology. It's a delivery modality. So, it's sort of a misnomer when you talk about microlearning, because we don't really learn people. That's not how this works. But microlearning is a way of delivering content. And so when we tell people, well, we're going to put you through microlearning, well, we really don't do that. What we do is we create objects or elements or mini courses that follow a microlearning path. And that's what we want to achieve. So those were a couple of things that I really wanted to level set to be sure that we all understood before we moved on. Another interesting fact here is that in a study done by Burns and by Deloitte, Meet the Modern Learner, 1% of a typical work week is all we have for employees to focus on training and development. 1%. So think about that. So if you think about your typical work week, what this means is that a single person only has about 24 minutes during the course of a full work week to focus on their learning and development, or their professional growth and development, or any sort of training that the organization needs them to take. So what does that mean for your microlearning efforts? Well, that means you have some pretty heavy duty competition. If I only have a scant 24 minutes, what am I going to do with that 24 minutes? That's the question. And typically what happens is the competition is, baby goats on YouTube, right? If I've got a spare 24 minutes, I might not dedicate that to professional growth and development. I may play Candy Crush. I may watch YouTube videos that have nothing to do with my professional growth and development. So that means we really need to focus on targeting our audience appropriately. Now, the main myth that you said that you wanted to discuss was, let me get my notes out, was the short time frame. Now let me see if we've got any additional, let's see, I want to see if we got any additional here. Yep, short time frame still in the lead, with whether or not it's primarily video and whether or not high tech is involved, and whether or not we need high tech. So this is where the poll worked out to be. So that's very curious indeed. And so let's go ahead and let's jump into whether or not it is indeed time dependent. So we're going to start here. Now, a lot of times what we hear in the world is, microlearning has to be 3 minutes. It has to be 5 minutes. Well, I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be any of those things. And any time that you sit in a presentation, a microlearning presentation, where the speaker tells you that if your microlearning is longer than 4 minutes, you are going to fail, then I would question the rest of the information coming from that speaker, because this is not true. What we like to say in micro-learning land is simply your micro-learning needs to be as long as necessary and as short as possible. Now, if you are going to uh, create courses or elements or objects around micro-learning that's going to take you 20 minutes or take a person 20 minutes to participate in, clearly that's not micro in scope. That's normal in scope, and that's okay if the content is appropriate. But there is no hard and fast rule about 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 12 minutes. As a matter of fact, one of the studies done by Vimeo as well as YouTube tells us that people have in and out capability. So people, for example, if we were to take video, for example, people will watch a 4-minute video, but if the content is extremely important and extremely relevant to them, then they will watch that video for 12 minutes. That's a big difference, 4 and 12, right? So that means what you need to do is concentrate on creating content that is as long as necessary to get your point across, but as short as possible, eliminating the bloat. So remember when we talked about our definition, right-sized learning, right? There was no time in that definition. It's right-sized for the moment. So you need to take the time that you need to take in order to explain, how something works, or how to do a process, or how to do a procedure, right? Now, as I said, here is the video study on how people view videos. 4.4 minutes upwards to 12. It's important to note also that when you create micro learning elements that are within your LMS and a website, that only 20% of the people read a web page from start to finish. So you need to think about really the duration of time that people are spending within your learning document. So regardless of whether or not it's a infographic or a video or a job aid or a podcast or audio clip, think about the duration that people are going to spend within that learning moment. So are they going to spend 4 minutes reading something? Are they going to spend 2 minutes reading something? Are they spending 5 minutes listening to something, or 6 minutes watching something? So be sure to keep all of that in mind. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions as they come up. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and type those in, and I will keep an eye on the questions that might be coming in. Okay. So now the second one was all about high tech. So let's talk about high tech. So hopefully that answers your questions about myths surrounding timing. Now, one of the things that I didn't talk about that I could address here really quickly is whether or not it takes you a long period of time to create the micro learning. And it really shouldn't. So micro learning should be something that's easily created by you and consumed in a short amount of time by the audience. Now, remember, when it comes to creating micro learning, it does matter how much time you're spending in the planning stage. Sometimes it takes twice as long to create something half as simple. Have we ever experienced that? Where it's like, oh my gosh, I really have to narrow down, and this is taking me forever. So anticipate that it might take you a longer period of time to create appropriate, well-designed micro-learning elements than it might if you're creating a full-blown course, right? Because you really have to get down to the target topic and the target audience, okay? So I just wanted to clear that up in regards to timing as well. Now, the next part that you guys clicked on was high tech requirements. We need more shiny things. We don't need more shiny things. I'm here to tell you, you don't need high tech to create microlearning objects, and you don't need specialized equipment for that either. You know, most of you have one of these, you know, and there is so much that you can do just with your cell phone, you know. So you think about user generated content, it doesn't have to be perfect. Perfection is the enemy of production. And a lot of times when we're talking about microlearning, it's about getting good out there. It's about getting information to the people who need it at the moment they need to have it. And so spending a lot of time worrying about high production value becomes counterproductive for you. Think about YouTube for a second. Now, there are billions of videos out there that you can watch. And some of the best videos to help you do the task that you want to do may not be the most glossy, may not be the most Spielberg-like. You know, they have really good audio. Maybe the picture isn't so great, but the point is that the information that you're getting is quality information. So this means then that you don't necessarily have to focus on video, so to speak. It could be low tech things like wallet cards or job aids or decision trees or infographics or checklists, user generated content. Many times we're afraid of user generated content. We say, well, if we let other people develop content for us, then what if it's bad? Okay. What if it's not? What if it's really good? What if you got people out there who are doing really good work? Don't you want to hear from them? Do you not think that your organization wants to hear from them? And the other argument that I get to this is, what if user generated content is wrong? What if it's incorrect? There is that risk. But let me tell you this, let me put this in front of you, is think about it. Someone has taken a moment, more than a moment, minutes, to pull out their cell phone, take a video of something, or take a picture of something, then upload that picture into whatever website, LMS project, discussion board, or what have you. And then they've typed in something about that photo. They've taken all of this time to do that. This means then that they're not the only ones. And this is where I want to catch it. So I want to see the incorrect stuff. So I can go back and I can talk to that person and say, help me understand where this came from. Or maybe it's something that's not process or procedure, but it's a really smart idea. And I want to learn more about that, right? And so when you think about microlearning and the use cases that we can do, it's not about high tech. Sometimes, most times it's low tech. I just created for an organization, they came to me and they had all of these processes and procedures that they wanted me to put into little e-learning applications. And when I looked at it, I was like, these are not e-learning applications. This is an infographic. All of these are taking these processes and procedures, putting it into an infographic that people can access either through an application or through a wall poster or something along those lines, because people needed that information and they don't want it to be buried within a course. So what we did is we created 25 infographics for this organization for them to send out to their different departments for different uses. And it's turned out to be wildly popular because people are like, oh my gosh, yes, this is exactly what I needed. Thank you for that. And that's what you want to do when you're thinking about your microlearning development. Okay, so now the third one on the list was that it should be easy to create. Okay, easy peasy, right? Easy stuff. Well, we know that this is not the case. Easy does not mean simple. Sometimes the simple stuff, as I said, is the most complicated to create. And why is that? It's because it needs a plan. Microlearning needs a plan. It depends on a concept that I refer to as content deconstruction. So what this means is that you have a topic, let's say communication. Communication is your topic, and you want to create some microlearning pieces around communication skills. Well, communication skills is very, very broad. There are so many things that we can talk about in regards to communication skills: verbal, nonverbal, body language, facial expressions, tone of voice. All of these things fall into effective communication. You can talk about one-way communication versus two-way communication. You can talk about effectively sending a message. So all of these things fall under that umbrella. Which one are you going to talk about? Okay, so let's say we decide to go with body language. Okay, well, fine, Shannon. We'll create our microlearning on body language. Really? Is it that simple? There are many things to discuss when it comes to body language. Let's pick that apart. So body language might be how you sit, your facial expressions, your hand gestures, body language during stressful situations, body language during an interview, body language during a feedback session. Okay, body language for when you're facilitating a class. Which are you going to talk about? So we need to narrow that down even further. So let's say we're going to talk body language during a classroom facilitation. Okay. Body language while you're lecturing, body language while you're hosting a group activity, body language for when you conclude, body language for when you open. What does that mean? So as you can see, we need to take apart and take apart and take apart and take apart and figure out what our precise focus is going to be. So it might be small, but it does need a plan. It needs a journey. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is, even though it might be tiny and it might just be an infographic, there is a narrative. So if you think about an infographic, you start at the top, most of them, you start at the top and you work down towards the bottom. So the top part of an infographic is the setup, the middle part is the narrative, and the bottom probably leads you to some sort of conclusion. So there is a narrative that goes with this. It's the same thing with shooting video. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end. And how do you address those instructions as you go along? So you need to really build a plan around even the smallest of microlearning efforts. Checklists, decision trees, etc. Those all need beginning and end points. What happens in the middle? What happens with those 2 minutes? So that the overall structure then becomes critically important, just as important as the context and the the relevance of the content that's being discussed. Right. So when you think about context, you're thinking about, oh, where is a person using it? That's part of your plan too. So that's why, again, it's just not a matter of tossing something out there. So if I go back to my client, they wanted to put these processes in little e-learning things, but that's not helpful in context, is it? So if I'm in the middle of doing my job and I need help to do my job, am I going to open up, an e-learning program in order to do that in the moment? No, I'm not. I need something that's going to help me right then, right now. So that's what we mean by contextual. And that's why it takes longer sometimes to create good, solid micro-learning content than it might be something that's fat and bloated, which we've thrown spaghetti at the wall in order to create. So hopefully that answers your question about that particular myth. Now the one that was third on our list was that it's a fad. This too shall pass, right? This too shall pass. this micro learning stuff will go away, and then I can get back to creating my e-learning programs, my virtual learning programs. I can go back in my classroom. It's just like chunking, it's a fad. And no, it's not. And actually, the research that I've done takes micro learning back to the mid 1990s. So let's think about what a fad is. A fad is defined as a short-lived trend that is widely shared. A short-lived trend, like purple hair perhaps might be a fad. Tomorrow it might be blue, but today the fad is purple. Okay, and a study in 2002 by the BBC indicated that 94% of learners preferred their learning modules to be under 10 minutes. That was back in 2002. And we know, just science tells us, that the brain needs a break. So shorter inevitably is better. And whether or not we've called it performance support or learning reinforcement or learning chunks or learning nuggets or bite-sized learning, regardless of the name that it falls under, micro-learning efforts have been around for a long time, and it's going to continue to be around for a long time. Now, we're going to get into the chunking discussion here in just a second, but remember that bite-sized learning is spaced learning. That means that a person is consuming it typically after a class, after a learning experience, but they're also using it to help them in their day-to-day. So it's a combination of learning reinforcement and performance support. Right. And so that spaced learning then becomes really important. So it's not a fad. Yeah, the name may have changed as time goes along, but the key here is that understanding what we can use it for and how it can help us lift the learning within your organizations and make learning stickier than it has been in the past. And that's really where we want to focus. All right. So now I've touched on the things that were most important to you. Let's talk about some of the other things here. We'll start with chunking. And so chunking, as I indicated when I was looking at the poll, it seems that most of you have a good idea that microlearning is not chunking. So I will just touch on the highlights here about the difference between chunking and microlearning. It's not a slice it and dice it. The key here is to be brief with you, microlearning has a very specific beginning, middle, and end. Chunking has a beginning, a middle, and a to be continued. And we need to do more chunking in our learning and development anyway. We need to really focus in on breaking down our training programs into manageable bites. But here's the key difference. If I take an hour video that is lecture based, and I say, well, that hour video, people are not going to sit around for an hour video, so I'm going to break it into 4 15-minute parts. Okay. Well, that means that part one, in order for me to understand that full hour, part one is contingent on somebody watching part two. I can't just jump in the middle and watch part two and leave, because I need to watch part one and I need to watch part three. And in order for me to really understand the whole thing, I need to watch part four. So that means that all of those puzzle pieces are interconnected. I need all of the puzzle pieces in order for the learning to be understood and to be acted upon. That's chunking. Now, micro-learning is just as I've explained prior. You've got this middle, beginning, and end. So if I were to take that same 1 hour video and break it into 4 15-minute parts, in order to make it micro-learning, for each of those 4 parts, I need to add an intro and a conclusion, so that 15-minute part, I can watch that 15-minute part and I can go about my day and I will have learned something from that 15-minute part without having to depend on watching part 2 afterwards. Hopefully this makes sense for you. Okay, so that is the key difference then between micro learning and chunking. All right, so we've talked about high tech. Let's talk about one size fits all. So micro learning is not one size fits all. It is not the magic unicorn, people. It is not the fairy wand that we can shake all over everything and think that it's going to fix all of our training issues. And that's not the case. Micro learning, as I've said, is about support. It's about performance support. It's about learning reinforcement. Not everything is appropriate to put into micro learning. And so this is where we really need to think about our plan. Micro learning is more about just in time. It's not just in case. Okay. And can we use it to support behavioral change? If we're using it as support, yes, but it's not the sole end all be all. You're not going to create a series of micro learning elements and hope that you're going to get behavior change out of that. What you need to do is you need to create an appropriate training intervention and use micro learning elements to support that intervention. And then you're going to see success. So not every subject matter or training module can be broken out into bite-sized pieces. Now, there are a lot that can, and what I might suggest to you is if you think about your phone, you have a variety of different apps within your phone. You know, I've got hundreds, way more than any person should have on their phone. But if you have an iPhone, for example, it allows you to bundle all of your apps together, right? So you have a square on your phone, and within that square, you have all the different apps that are related to each other. Like you might have all of your travel apps in one bundle. You might have all of your productivity apps in another bundle. You might have all of your finance related apps in another bundle. And microlearning can be developed like that. So you can have all of these different microlearning elements that have to do with communication skills, and you've bundled them all together, and you give people access to that bundle. And then people can choose. I want to learn about body language during group activities. I want to learn about tone of voice while I'm on a webinar. I want to learn about facial expressions while I'm on a webinar. Okay. And so all of these different elements are within that bundle that people can pick and choose as they wish in any order that they wish. Now we're getting somewhere. So we can then use that bundle to support a larger macro sized learning event. Or you can even just send it out for people who want help. Maybe you're not going to do a specialized training for communication skills. You're just going to give them all of the tools. That's great too. So think about how it's going to be used. And that will answer your question as far as whether or not it's appropriate for that moment. All right. Let's see. We've talked about video. Let's talk about video. Okay, because you know, TED Talks, right? Everybody seems to go to video. So video is the answer. No, video is not always the answer. Video is usually a good answer, but it's not the answer. So there are other things to consider before we slap stuff within a video. You have to think again about context. If you have a group of salespeople, for example, out wandering about, is a video a good way to send training to them? Not necessarily, because they're in their cars. They may not have time to watch a video, but they probably have time to listen to audio. So you could create a podcast series of short little micro audio clips that give your sales team guidance and support during the course of their day. That is searchable, right? You could develop a salesperson app that sits on their phone where they can access checklists or scripts or product knowledge information that they can access very quickly before they went in to go see their client. So video isn't always the answer. I've been working a lot right now using what I'm referring to as conversational learning, meaning the use of text messaging, messaging within WhatsApp or within web applications such as your learning management system, and delivering learning in micro-learning elements through mobile applications. So if you had a sales team and they're sitting in their car and they just got a chat message, an automated chat message that says, would you like to learn more about XYZ product? Hey, while I'm having lunch and I'm sitting in my car, why, yes, I do. And they can text yes, or they can click on yes, and the information pops up. So this becomes super handy when you think about context, and it has nothing to do with video. You know, video is a good thing. We are very visual animals, and a lot of times video is our go-to method of learning things, but it doesn't always have to be 100% video. And the thing about video, I'm going to tell you this, one quick tip about video is, if you are going to produce video, don't worry too much. Good video is important. Good produced video is important, but the audio is even more important. I was watching a rehash of a webinar not too long ago, and it was really interesting, and it was a topic that I really wanted to learn about. And as I was watching it, it was okay, but the audio was horrible and I just couldn't. So I just turned it off. And people will do that. They will accept poor video in lieu of with good audio. But if your audio is terrible, people are not going to watch it. So keep that in mind as you are developing your micro-learning objects that might be video based. Okay. So let's see, where are we at? Did we clear everything up? We talked about time dependent. We talked about video. We've discussed high tech. We talked about easy to create. We've talked about chunking, and we talked about one size fits all. So I think we've discussed most of the items that you wanted to discuss. And so now what I'm really interested in is learning about some of the questions that you have in regards to micro-learning specifically. So I've left some time open, so before I put together any final information and thoughts for you, I wanted to take an opportunity to really open this up and see what sorts of questions you may have. So question number one, will I share the presentation after the meeting? Absolutely. You will have access to this presentation. The question about microlearning not being for complex instructional material, I would agree with. As I said, it really is about augmentation at this point. So if you have something that is complicated in nature, then use microlearning to support the learning moment. You know, so send them, I'm a big believer in drip feeds. Then what that means is that you can send microlearning to people using email, something really simple. Everybody's in their email. So you could create a little short video that reinforced any lesson that you want reinforced, and you can send them that video in their email. So there you go. So that's something really super easy that you can do to help support some of your more complex materials. Now, another question was about, what do I consider bloat? Bloat is any training program that is shoved full of information that the learner doesn't need. And a lot of times we will create training programs that that are filled with backstory. So the history of health and safety in the US, it's like, no, we don't need that. Just tell me how to climb a ladder, please. You know, and so we put all of this non-sequential information into the training event, and we don't need to have it there, right? And so what we do is people tune out. And what microlearning is really good at doing, and once you get really good at doing creating it, is eliminating the bits and pieces that do not need to be there. And this is really hard. This takes practice. It takes you going back and going, okay, I just talked about this. Does this align with what I said the goal of this microlearning element is going to be? The focus of this microlearning element is how to open up a webinar. Okay, here are some tips and tricks, techniques for opening up a webinar. This talks about how to produce breakout rooms. Well, that has nothing to do with opening up a webinar. It's good information, but not at this point. So we need to throw that out. So think about the things that do not belong and get rid of them. And that's what will help you prevent bloat. It seems difficult to take a big topic and break it up and not end up with something that's just chunks. Yeah, so it really is a different mindset. So when you're thinking about chunking versus microlearning, as I said, you have this beginning, middle to be continued versus a beginning, middle, end. So you think about if you're creating your microlearning elements, and at the end of whatever it is, you sit back and you review it. Think to yourself, do I need additional information to understand what is happening in front of me? If you do, you've created a chunked piece. And sometimes that's okay. If you can get through the microlearning element, whatever it is, and go, okay, awesome, I can do what I need to do now, then you've created a microlearning element. So that is your litmus test, if you will. If you are in it and now I need to have something else in order for this to make sense, you've created a chunked piece. If I can view this microlearning element and take off and do my job or do the thing that I need to do, you've created a microlearning piece. So hopefully that answers your question for you. So when we want to learn more about some topics, should we include links or contact? Absolutely, absolutely. So you're looking at this piece, like I just said, and you're thinking, yes, I can do this process. But if I want to do this process even better, or if I want to learn additional information, you could include a link. But what you're learning now does not depend on that link. So this is sort of that, if you think about an e-learning course and you have that button that says click here to learn more, that's exactly what it is. It's that click here to learn more. So the example that I gave you with the chat, here's an example of how we use microlearning to help a pharmaceutical company. So we created a chat bot for a pharmaceutical company. They went through a full training program, but the organization wanted to be sure that the training stuck. And so we sent out chats to them where the salespeople could, if they wanted to, learn more about certain topics. And so we would send a chat message to them saying, hi, do you have a few minutes to learn more about XYZ product? Yes or no? And if they said yes, then we would send them a link or a video or an article or an audio clip about it. If they said no, we would say, great, we understand that you're busy right now. What day would you like to revisit this? And then they could say Tuesday. Okay, so on Tuesday, the message would go back out to them. And then the training department, or rather the organization, would receive reports on who did what when. And so we had all of this information. And so that becomes something that you don't need high tech capability to create a chatbot. Incidentally, you know, it takes time and it takes planning, but you can do it, or you can hire companies like myself to do it for you. But you can still make some of these drip messagings work. Another example of how you can make it work, like I said, is with that email. Now, that's something everyone here can do. You can set up automated emails to send out to your people. And so that's how you then follow up on any of the learning. All right, I've got a couple of minutes left. Let's see what we've got here. So hopefully somebody asked for a practical example. Hopefully that gave you a practical example. I gave you the infographic example that we did for a client. I showed you or talked about the chatbot example that we did for the pharma company. We also did put together for another organization, for a banking organization, we put together a series of email templates for them to use as drip feed information that they could put in place after a specific training was used for them. So there's another way of using it. So some of them standalone, some of them as learning reinforcement. Should microlearning have short quizzes? No, I'm not a big proponent of that. Microlearning is about that just-in-time need. So think about it. When you go to YouTube and watch that video on how to fix your toilet, do they give you a quiz at the end? No. You take the information, you go to work with it. Save the quizzes and the tests for your bigger macro programs. And yes, microlearning can be applied in your university class. Absolutely. Use it as performance support or learning reinforcement. Have your university classes and in between breaks. So if you have one class a week or a couple of classes a week in between the classes, send out some microlearning elements that can support the lessons that they've just used. And best practices for linking microlearning together. Hopefully the bundle example that I gave you will give you some idea as to how you can link those together. You can bundle them together and you can say, please start with microlearning object number 1, and you're going to end with microlearning number 10, but everything in between, take as you wish. So this presentation in microlearning format, if I were going to create microlearning about this particular presentation, what I would do is I would take each individual topic, and let's go different. Let's not say video. Let's say it becomes a podcast series. So podcast series number 1, the myth surrounding video. Podcast series number 2, the myth surrounding technology. Podcast number 3, the myth around it being a fad. And so you create a podcast series where people can go into the podcast library, and then they can select which one they want to listen to. So there's an example of how I would use podcasting for this particular example. And yes, you can absolutely use a YouTube channel, Eric, for sure. You can make your YouTube channels private. If you're an independent consultant, you can make them public. There's lots of different security features that you can use for independent YouTube channels. All right. What qualities of training situations make microlearning a good choice? As I've said repeatedly here, it's about, is it going to help a person do their job when they need to do it? That's the key. Will it reinforce the learning so much so that people will be smarter, better, faster at what they do? And that's really the end game when it comes to all of this. Here we go. We've reached the end of what we're going to do. And once again, thank you so much for having me, Shannon Tipton, Learning Rebels. So it was really great to be with you today. And thank you so much for having me, Paulina.
So thanks to all. Thanks to you, Shannon, and see you at the next webinar.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Bye-bye.
rest of your day.
Bye, guys.